The gates opened with a metallic groan echoing the sound of freedom after years of concrete walls and steel bars. For 2.5 years, this place had been my world. Now I walked out with nothing but a photograph clenched in my fist and the knowledge that everything outside was waiting for me. A line of black cars stretched beyond the barrier, polished so clean the sun glanced off them like knives. Men in suits stood at attention. Their voices rose as one the moment my foot touched the pavement. Boss. The word rolled over me, a tide of loyalty I hadn't heard in far too long. My grip only tightened on the photograph in my hand, the picture of the man who had smiled at me like he feared nothing in this world. The man who once made me believe in something gentler than conquest. Thomas. The man who had put me in jail, or at least the man I once believed had. I slid into the backseat of the waiting car. The leather still smelled the same, familiar, grounding. My secretary followed, a stack of folders in his hands, already speaking as if the world hadn't shifted beneath us. Boss, these are your pending contracts, overseas partnerships, and a full report on the board's performance during your absence. Where should we begin? I stared down at the photograph, the creases running across his face like scars. Thomas. His dark brown eyes were looking back at me, more like glaring, and his lips were curled into a defiant smile, one that often pulls me in to kiss him, just to have a taste of the fire brewing in his tongue. I groaned as I stared right back at the face of the man who had been mine once upon a time. My voice came out steady. Drive me to my little tiger. The car moved, the city unfolding outside my window, but my mind slipped elsewhere, back to the first time I saw him. We met at a networking event 2 years before my arrest. I remember spotting him across the room, sleeves rolled, tie crooked, arguing with a man twice his age over market forecasts. There was fire in his voice, no hesitation in his stance. When someone introduced us, I smirked at his name. Thomas? What, like Tom from Tom and Jerry? His eyes narrowed, lips twitching into something dangerous. Keep laughing and I'll scratch your eyes out so you finally learn what Tom can do. I'd laughed then, but it wasn't mockery. It was the thrill of finding someone unafraid of me. From that night on, he became my little tiger. And for a while, he was mine, fierce, untamed. A lover who matched my fire with his own. But then came prison, and everything changed. The car stopped in front of his old apartment. I stepped out and walked inside. It was hollow now, dust gathered in corners, sheets draped over forgotten furniture. I sat on the edge of his bed, clutching the photograph tighter, trying to picture him here again. When I was in jail, he came to see me. Every week, without fail, for 6 months. He'd sit across from me, arms folded, that sharp tongue of his blunted by guilt, the guilt of believing he was the reason I'd been thrown behind bars. I let him think that. In fact, I fed it. To me, guilt was an anchor. Maybe if he carried it long enough, he'd stay tied to me, never leave. But then, the visit stopped. When he finally came again, almost a year into my sentence, it wasn't to stay. He had looked me in the eye that day, voice quiet in a way I'd never heard before. I can't do this anymore. I have an offer in another state. I won't be able to come. I had seen it coming, of course. Distance erodes everything. But when he took off the necklace I'd given him and placed it on the table between us, saying, "This is goodbye for good," something inside me had gone cold. I told him to enjoy his life, that when I got out, I'd come for him. He only shook his head. "No, Damien, this is the end." And that was it. My secretary's voice broke the memory. He stood at the doorway, file in hand, expression careful. "We did as you asked, sir. Everything we could find on him." I took the folder, though my hands already trembled with knowledge I didn't want. Photographs stared back at me. Thomas, dressed in sharp suits, standing beside another man. So he is married now. Victor Laurent, his husband. The papers detailed the timeline, the job offer, the move, the marriage. All of it fit together neatly. Too neatly. If I hadn't known better, if my team hadn't uncovered the traitors in my company who orchestrated the fraud, pinned the entire mess on Thomas, I might have believed it had been him all along, that my little tiger had betrayed me. But Thomas wasn't a liar. Blunt, fiery, reckless with his words, yes, but never a liar. When he told me back then that he hadn't touched the accounts, I believed him. And I still do. I looked at his pictures again. He was smiling. He looked happy. Maybe not the fierce little tiger I once knew, but happiness is rare enough in this world. Who was I to take it away from him? My secretary asked quietly, "What should we do, sir?" I closed the folder, pressing the pain back into silence. My head throbbed from holding too many thoughts at once, from trying to make sense of the man I loved becoming the man in those photos. "Take me home," I said. My empire was waiting, and Thomas was gone. Hey Daydreamers, thanks for tuning in. If you are liking this story so far, tell us where you are listening from in the comments section and hit the subscribe and notification button so you don't miss any story uploads. Let's continue. My name is Damien Hale, tycoon, investor, the man with the kind of money that makes problems disappear and enemies choke on their own ambition. People call me ruthless, untouchable, a wolf dressed in the finest suit money can buy. They're not wrong. 2 years, 6 months ago, I was sent to prison. Tax fraud, they said. Paperwork, signatures, money trails, all pointing to me. But that's the thing about wolves. You can't cage them without bait. And my bait was him, Thomas, my lover. My little tiger. The only man I've ever let close enough to wound me. The man who made one costly mistake that landed me behind bars. Or so I was made to believe. He thought he destroyed me. He thought leaving me was the end. I swore I'd let him go. Hell, I almost believed it myself. But then I saw the bruises. And that changed everything. I had barely settled back into my life, barely breathed the air of freedom when the invitations started arriving. Charity galas, board dinners, press events. My presence commanded attention now, and I had no intention of disappointing, especially when the host was the man who had his hands on my tiger. My entrance would be noticed. That much I knew, but attention was nothing new. I had learned to command it long before prison, and time behind bars had only sharpened the edges. The hall was vast, chandeliers dripping crystal light onto polished marble. Waiters moved in perfect sync, glasses clinking softly. Laughter floated around me like music, polite and rehearsed. I walked along the edge, shaking hands, nodding at acquaintances, yet my mind kept wandering. I scanned faces in clusters, old allies, competitors, people who had tried to see me fall during my absence. All of them were distractions. All of them were unimportant. And then I saw him. Not immediately. My eyes didn't catch the small figure until he moved through a group of people. And even then, it took a second before recognition struck like a physical force. Thomas. He was wearing a dark blue satin dress shirt, crisp and tailored, but there was no fire in the way he held himself. His shoulders were slightly rounded, his movements careful, measured, as if each step had been calculated to avoid drawing attention. He laughed at something I couldn't hear, and I noticed the stiffness in his fingers, the way he barely turned his head toward the speaker. That laugh didn't reach his eyes. I remembered when it did. A memory rose unbidden, our first gala together, years ago. He had argued with the maitre d' over table assignments, arms flailing, voice sharp and impossible to ignore. He had sworn he didn't care about rules, that he'd sit wherever he wanted, that no one could tell him to behave. I had called him my little tiger, and he had swatted at me, fiery and fearless, warning me he'd scratch my eyes out if I teased him too much. That was Thomas. That fire, that bite. I could feel it in my bones just remembering. Now standing across the room, the man in front of me was polite, subdued. He had grown smaller somehow, and seeing it made my chest ache in a way I hadn't expected. And he was not alone. Victor Laurent was beside him. His hand rested lightly on Thomas's back, but I saw the subtle pull in his grip, the way Thomas's fingers twitched almost imperceptibly. Ownership disguised as affection. It made my blood heat in ways I wasn't ready to acknowledge. I took a slow breath and let the crowd carry me forward, keeping my gaze low, pretending interest in a conversation I barely listened to. Every movement of Thomas, every subtle flicker of unease was etched into my mind. I couldn't look away. Then Thomas glanced in my direction. Our eyes met for a split second, and I swear the world paused. Recognition. Shock. A flash of something buried deep, but quickly masked. He looked away, almost immediately, as if a thought too dangerous had brushed his mind. That hesitation was enough. I kept observing him all through the evening, never missing the moments where Victor's hand tightened slightly on his wrist, and Thomas flinched, small but unmistakable. The fury simmering just beneath my calm kept bubbling. My little tiger, tamed, cornered, treated like property, and I had to fight to keep my composure in a room full of people. Curiosity got the best of me. When I saw Thomas standing alone by the far side of the gallery, a moment of opportunity presented itself. I moved toward him, steps measured, calm, but my pulse was anything but. Thomas noticed me first. His eyes widened fractionally, a flicker of shock, and then he masked it with a polite, professional smile. I allowed the silence to stretch just long enough to remind him who I was. Thomas. His name left my mouth smooth, deliberate. A statement, not a greeting. He froze, his knuckles whitening around the glass before he lifted it. Damien. I slid into the seat beside him uninvited, leaning back like I owned the place. 2 years, 6 months. That's how long it's been since we last sat together. He swallowed hard. You're out. A smirk pulled at my lips. Parole. Good behavior. I let the words linger, watching the irony twist in his head. Not the way I usually play the game, but it was efficient. He shifted, sunglasses hiding more than just his eyes. I could smell the lie in his posture, the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. You look different, I murmured, letting my gaze slide over him, slow and heavy. Though I can't decide if it's time or him. He tilted his head, considering. Yeah, I guess I am. Last I heard from you, you were leaving the city for that job. My tone was casual, as if I didn't already know everything. Before he could answer, the air shifted. Victor appeared, tall and commanding, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. My love, sorry for keeping you waiting, he said, and without warning, pulled Thomas into a kiss. Bruising, possessive. Thomas struggled slightly, his hands rising instinctively before falling back, and when they parted, I saw it. His sleeve had shifted, revealing a faint bruise along his forearm. He caught my gaze immediately and slid the sleeve back down, smooth, controlled. Victor followed my stare and then turned to me. You must be? I extended my hand, keeping my voice even and calm. I didn't just have a thought of snapping his neck. Damien Hale. Victor laughed loudly, a rich, confident sound. I'm kidding, he said. Of course I know who you are. Who doesn't know the famous Damien Hale? His eyes gleamed with a mix of amusement and something sharper. How was prison? I let the jab slide, smiled faintly, and then tilted my head toward Thomas. And he is. Thomas's voice was clipped, formal. This is my husband, Victor, the host for tonight. The conversation became small, rehearsed pleasantries. Victor's hand remained firm around Thomas's waist, a subtle claim, a silent reminder. Thomas followed the motions, eyes careful, polite, but fleetingly glancing at me. The softness in them almost imperceptible. Victor excused them shortly after, pulling Thomas along as the crowd shifted. As they moved away, Thomas's gaze flickered back once, a soft, fleeting longing. I held my stare, unblinking, noting every detail. The way Victor's grip tightened, the faint bruise now hidden under fabric, the tension that lingered in the air between us. And then they were gone, swallowed by the crowd, leaving me with the memory of his eyes and the certainty that this was far from over. I should have walked away. That's what I told myself the moment I saw Victor's hand tighten around his waist, the mark on Thomas's arm disappearing under fabric like a secret shoved into a drawer. The Thomas I knew, the man who once stared me down in a boardroom full of sharks and told me I was arrogant to my face, never needed saving. He was fire in human form, sharp-tongued, fearless, my little tiger. But what I saw tonight wasn't him. 18 months had passed since the day he'd left me in that prison visitor's room, his voice steady as he said it was over. 18 months, and now I was staring at a man whose fire had been snuffed out, and that unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I could have stepped in right then, challenged Victor, but no, that would have been reckless, emotion clouding judgment. Instead, I slipped back into the crowd, a smile plastered on my face as if I hadn't just seen the ghost of the man I used to love. Back in the car, my secretary glanced up from his tablet. The gallery was shorter than expected. "Should I move your next meeting forward, sir?" "No," I said. "Cancel everything tonight." He hesitated, but he knew better than to argue. The city lights blurred past as we drove. My mind replayed the look in Thomas's eyes when Victor kissed him, conflicted, almost ashamed. That wasn't the man I remembered. The Thomas I knew would have shoved Victor back, clawed at him if he had to. Where had that man gone? I turned to my secretary. "Find out everything you can about Victor Ivanov, quietly. No trails, no whispers back to him." He nodded, typing quickly. "And Thomas Hale," I added, my voice softer. "Start from the day he left the city until now. I want details. Every move, every job, every connection." A pause. "Do you suspect something, sir?" "I don't suspect," I said, eyes fixed on the window. "I know." The car fell silent, but inside my head the noise was deafening. I hadn't planned to intrude on his life. I hadn't planned to reopen wounds that prison and betrayal had already carved deep. But the bruise, the look in his eyes, it wasn't something I could ignore. Thomas once told me he hated pity more than anything. He'd rather fight tooth and nail than be seen as fragile. So if something had tamed him, broken him, then I needed to know what. Not to save him, I told myself. He didn't need saving. But to understand how my little tiger had been turned into someone I barely recognized. And maybe, just maybe, to remind him he was never meant to live in a cage. I don't believe in coincidence. It's not for men like me. So when I walked into the Black Oak that night, it wasn't on a whim, it was planned. It used to be our place. A quiet bar tucked away from the glittering city, where the music never drowned out conversation, and the whiskey was always sharp. Thomas called it our blowing off steam spot, back when he dragged himself in, after 12-hour days crunching numbers for clients who would never thank him. I wasn't sure what I expected when I stepped inside. But there he was. Thomas sat at the far end of the counter, nursing a glass of bourbon. Sunglasses indoors, collar turned up despite the warmth of the room. To anyone else, he looked like a man hiding from the world. To me, he looked like a man hiding bruises. I slid onto the stool beside him without asking. He stiffened but didn't turn, his hand tightening around his glass. "You still drink bourbon neat?" I asked casually. His breath hitched before he finally faced me. Behind the tinted lenses, I could almost see the flicker of recognition, the panic. "Damien, Thomas." I gave him a slow smile. "Didn't think you'd still haunt our little spot." "It's not." He stopped, pressed his lips together, then tried again. "I come here sometimes. Long day." His voice was brittle. I leaned back, studying him. "Still working yourself into the ground?" "I'm an analyst. Comes with the job." His tone carried that same edge he'd always had when defending his profession. "Some of us don't run empires. We grind." There, a spark of the old fire. For a second, I saw my little tiger again. "So you are married now?" He nodded and said nothing, so I continued. "Are you happy?" He looked at me once and then looked away. "Yes, my marriage is fine." I laughed under my breath. "Fine." The word tasted like poison. "Is that what you call it now?" His jaw snapped tight. "Every man loves differently." That made me laugh for real this time. Dark, amused. "You're right about that. Some love builds, some destroys. Which one do you think you've got?" He turned toward me, finally pulling off his sunglasses. His eyes were tired, rimmed red. But when he snapped, the old Thomas showed through. "I don't know why you even care. Why are you concerned with someone who threw you in jail? We broke up, Damien. You don't owe me anything." "Ah," I leaned in, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Is that what you believe? That you put me in jail?" The way he froze was answer enough. I let it hang for a second before continuing, calm and deliberate. "I already dealt with the ones who set me up. You weren't part of that. You were just the perfect scapegoat. They needed a fall guy, and your name fit. You weren't my mistake, Thomas. My mistake was trusting traitors in my company." His eyes widened, disbelief flooding in, then guilt. "What are you saying?" "No, Damien, it was my error. I made the mistake that triggered everything. It cost you." I shook my head, firm. "No, you were the sacrificial lamb." His lips parted, a faint tremor in his voice. "Oh God." His eyes glistened, and for a heartbeat, he looked like the man who used to fight me tooth and nail over everything, only to curl against me hours later. Vulnerable, fierce, mine. I almost softened. Almost. "When I saw you at that party," I said quietly, "it took everything in me not to storm over and whisk you away from him. But you say you're happy now." I let my gaze slide deliberately to the faint shadow of a bruise peeking under his cuff. "So I'll leave you be." I leaned closer, enough for him to feel my breath. But Thomas, the next time I see a bruise on you, happy or not, I will bring hell with me. He shivered, the glass in his hand rattling against the counter. He didn't answer, but he looked at me stunned. I stood, dropped a few bills on the bar, and touched the rim of his glass. Take care, little tiger. And then I walked out. The night air hit me hard, but not as hard as the truth. Something had broken him. The fire was still in there, but dimmed, caged. That wasn't my Thomas, the man who once snapped at me, keep laughing and I'll scratch your eyes out so you can see what Tom can do. No, this man was shackled. I could free him. I could destroy Victor Ivanov with a snap of my fingers and take Thomas back in an instant. But I won't, at least not now, and if Thomas wanted out, he would have to come to me. My little tiger needed to remember his claws before I reminded him of mine. I might still be in love, but I am not a fool. I promised I wouldn't chase after him. I'd let him come to me. But I couldn't get the image out of my head. His wrist trembling when he pulled down his sleeve, the spark of guilt when I told him he hadn't ruined me, the relief that flickered so quickly it almost broke me. I leaned back in the leather seat of my car and called Marcus. If anyone could dig into a man's bones without leaving a trace, it was him. Ex-military, now my fixer, the kind of man who understood silence better than words. He answered on the first ring. Boss. I want eyes on Victor Ivanov, I said. Discreet, no shadows close enough for him to smell. Start with his money. If he's hiding something, it'll be in the books. Understood. And Thomas? The name hit harder than I wanted to admit. I kept my tone even. Routine check-ins only. Places he goes, people he sees. No approach, no contact, just patterns. Marcus was quiet for a beat. He'd worked for me long enough to know when I was pretending indifference. Got it. I'll feed you reports every 3 days. I hung up and stared out the tinted window. The city lights bled into streaks of gold and white. 3 years ago, Thomas had been fire. My little tiger, sharp-tongued and fearless. He'd warned me once with a smile that if I ever betrayed him, he'd claw my eyes out. I'd laughed and kissed him harder. Now he let another man bruise him. Now he wore sunglasses indoors. Now he told me he was fine. Something happened in those 18 months I was gone. Something big enough to cage him. My secretary cleared his throat from the front seat. Sir, do you want me to prepare the quarterly? No. My voice came out sharper than intended. I softened it. Not yet. First, I want every contract Ivanov Holdings has touched in the last 2 years on my desk. Partners, shell companies, side ventures, all of it. Yes, sir. I loosened my tie, but the knot only tightened. This wasn't just about business anymore. Victor Ivanov had laid hands on what was mine, and whether Thomas admitted it or not, the bruises were proof enough. I wasn't about to storm into that house and drag him out. Not yet. That would make me no better than Victor, deciding for him. No. Thomas had to come to me willingly. But the next time I saw him marked, I wouldn't hold back. This wasn't about rescue. It was about war. The report sat open on my desk. Its edges crumpled from how tightly I'd been gripping it. Thomas' family was in a huge debt. Enough to crush a family twice over, and Victor had bought it out years ago. A neat little hook in his ribs, keeping him tethered. Add to that the bruises, hidden under sleeves and sunglasses. Too conveniently placed to be accidents. Add to that the level of fraudulent practices and shady investments undergoing in Victor's company, the kind of rot any sharp analyst would spot from a mile away. And Thomas was an investment analyst. He saw everything, which meant Victor was keeping him on a leash, because if Thomas ever turned on him, the empire would crumble. The anger in my chest was molten. He wasn't just being paraded around like a trophy. He was being suffocated, piece by piece, chained by debts that weren't even his, and caged by knowledge he couldn't use. I snapped the file shut. Where is he now? I asked. Marcus responded immediately. He's at the Grove Market. Looks like he does the shopping himself. No staff. Victor probably thinks it makes them look normal. Normal. I almost laughed. Nothing about this was normal. I grabbed my keys. Send me the coordinates. Within minutes, I was parked at the grocery store's parking lot, which was nearly empty. And I saw him walking out with a paper bag tucked against his chest, sunglasses hiding half his face. I pulled the car up beside him, the window sliding down. Get in, I said. Thomas froze mid-step. His jaw tightened, and for a second I saw the ghost of my little tiger, the man who would have thrown the bag at my windshield just to spite me. But now, he hesitated. Too long. Finally, he opened the door and slipped in without a word. We drove in silence, tension like barbed wire between us. I didn't bother softening the blow. I know about the debt. His head snapped toward me, knuckles white around the grocery bag. You had no right. And I know Victor uses it to keep you on a leash. That and the bruises you think you're hiding. My voice was razor sharp. He beats you, Thomas, and he's laundering money right under your nose, banking on the fact that you won't talk because if you do, you go down with him. Stop. His voice cracked, low and shaking. You don't know what you're talking about. I swerved onto a side street and slammed the brakes. The car jerking to a halt. I turned to him, fury boiling over. I don't? You're being used as a shield. If Victor falls, he's gonna make sure you're the one in the line of fire. And you're sitting there pretending this is a marriage? His jaw clenched, his body rigid. It is my marriage. My problem. You don't get to waltz back in after 3 years and... Your problem? I cut in, my laugh bitter. Your problem is that you've let him kill the fire in you, The Thomas I loved would have set the whole damn house on fire before he let a man chain him down. That's when he yanked off the sunglasses and I saw it, the faint bruise under his eye, the shame burning hotter than the injury itself. His knuckles went white around the bag. I know what I signed. I can deal with it. I can handle my marriage. For a second, I almost laughed, because even in defeat, he still had claws. Now that, I said softly, is the worst lie you've ever told me. He turned away, throat working, and I knew I had him cornered. Not by force, but by truth. I reached across the console, grabbed his jaw and kissed him. Hard. He shoved against me at first, fists clenching, fighting me like he used to fight the world. But then, like a dam breaking, he melted. His mouth opened to mine, desperate, aching, his whole body trembling as if the kiss was oxygen after drowning too long. When we finally broke apart, our breaths ragged, I whispered against his lips, "I missed you, my little tiger." His eyes snapped open, glassy with unshed tears. "Don't call me that," he rasped, pushing back against the seat. We sat there, silence pulsing heavy between us. I studied him. The shadows under his eyes, the bruise he tried to hide, the way his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Come back to me," I said quietly. He shook his head, voice breaking. "It's not that simple." A bitter smile tugged at my mouth. "You once told me nothing is too complicated. All you have to do is find the loose end and pull." He didn't reply. He just opened the door, one foot on the pavement before he looked back. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Victor has people watching me. Don't find me again. Not yet." And then he was gone, leaving the door ajar and my heart raging in my chest. For the following week, I let Thomas be and concentrate on my work. Meanwhile, still keeping Marcus hot on Victor's trail and feeding me back with every little info he had found. And from what I have gathered, the man was all shades of wrong, and his empire was literally a house of cards. Thomas is smart enough to have figured this out, so what was keeping him so tethered? I understand the issue of the debt, but the physical abuse? Still not clear to me. I was still sifting through Victor's financials when I heard the slam of my front door. Not a knock. Not the tentative hum I used to recognize as Thomas's presence. No, this was violent, deliberate, a storm breaking loose inside my house. I didn't rise from my chair. I didn't have to. I knew it was him. He came into view a moment later, his lower lip split, one eye swelling purple. His jaw was clenched so hard I thought his teeth would shatter. He didn't say a word, just stormed toward my bar, grabbed a bottle of single malt, and poured himself a glass with a shaking hand. No greetings, no hesitation, just pure rage and fire. He downed the first glass in one go, poured another. I stayed where I was, leaning back in my chair, watching him like a man would watch a wild animal corner itself. When he went for a third pour, I stood, crossed the room, and caught his wrist before the liquid touched the crystal. "That's enough," he turned, eyes bloodshot, chest heaving. "Let go. Use your words, Tom." My voice was low, steady, the same voice I used to use on him years ago when he thought silence would protect him. Something in him broke. He slammed the glass down so hard it rattled against the wood. "What do you want me to say, Damien? That he finally did it? That he broke me?" His laugh was hollow, brittle. "Well, congratulations. You were right." I didn't answer. Silence was sharper than sympathy. He raked a hand through his hair and stormed past me, heading straight into my gym. I followed, but didn't interfere. He yanked the gloves off the wall, shoved his bruised hands into them without wrapping, and went for the heavy bag. Each punch landed with raw desperation. I leaned against the doorframe and let him burn through it. Anger, grief, humiliation, every strike was Thomas bleeding out what Victor had caged inside him. Minutes passed, his arms slowed, his shoulders sagged. Finally, he collapsed against the bag, sliding down until he sat on the floor, head in his hands. His body shook, but no sound came out. I walked over, sat down beside him, close but not touching. My silence told him I wasn't going anywhere. Eventually, he spoke. His voice was cracked, raw. "You want to know how I got here? How I became this pathetic thing I couldn't recognize in the mirror?" I gave him no response, but my attention and focus was fixed entirely on him, willing him to spill, to give sense to my curiosity. He laughed again, bitter. "You think I married him because I loved him? That I woke up one day and decided Victor was better than you?" His voice faltered, softer now. "The truth is, I was broken before I ever walked into that courthouse." He stared at his gloved fists. "When you went to prison, I thought it was my fault. Everyone blamed me. The whispers, the stares, it was like I was poison. My own family treated me like a stain." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "And then my father, God, my father, he went and signed one of his brilliant deals, put us in debt so deep we couldn't crawl out. Victor swooped in, all smiles, offering to buy it. Said he wanted me. I thought maybe this was it. A way out, a reset button." His eyes glistened, but he blinked hard, refusing to let them fall. But it wasn't a reset, it was a leash. The words lodged in my chest. "He knew," Thomas whispered. "He knew I blamed myself for you. He fed that guilt, Damien. Every time I tried to breathe, he'd remind me. If you'd been smarter, Damien wouldn't have gone down. If you hadn't been careless, he'd still be free." And I believed him. I let him chain me with my own guilt. I listened intently to him and watched as tears dripped from his eyes. I wanted to pull him into a hug, but decided against it. This is his time to vent. So I let him. And when I started noticing, his numbers didn't add up, that his deals were crooked. He stopped pretending. The bruises started then. Not every night, just enough to remind me who I belonged to. Thomas laughed through his tears, bitter and small. The funny thing is, he never wanted me for love. He wanted me for silence, for obedience. Because I see things, Damien. Because I'm an analyst. And the moment I opened my mouth, I became a liability. I clenched my fists, forcing my voice to stay calm. And tonight what happened? His head dropped into his hands again. Tonight he came home drunk, tried to force himself on me. It's not the first time, but today I was just so mad at myself about how much of this bullshit I had taken for months, so I fought back. His voice cracked, fury bleeding through. I knocked him on his ass, Damien, and then I ran. I came here because he cut himself off. I finally touched him then, my hand on his shoulder. Steady, unyielding, because this is the only place you still feel safe. He didn't deny it. He just reached into his jacket, pulled out a thin file, and shoved it at me. His hands shook as he spoke. I know you won't stop digging, so here. All the discrepancies I found in his investments, the ones he doesn't think I noticed, you'll find them there. Our eyes met. Our eyes met. For the first time in 18 months, I saw him, my Thomas, the one who once burned with fire and refused to bow. And then he stood, dropped the gloves, and walked out without another word. I didn't stop him, just watched him stride to the door like a man on a mission. And as the door closed, one thought cut through me like steel. My tiger still has claws. After Thomas left, I plugged the USB into my system and began shifting through what he'd uncovered. Numbers that didn't add up. Shell corporations hidden under shell corporations. Investments that bled more red than they should. Payments to accounts in places where no legitimate deal should have gone. But it wasn't the numbers that made my blood boil. It was the reality behind them. Thomas had seen it all. He had carried this knowledge inside him while Victor used his fists and words to keep him quiet. Every line of data was a bruise. Every false ledger, a scar. By the time I shut the screen, I wanted Victor dead. But rage without strategy is suicide, and I wasn't suicidal. Not anymore. So instead of putting a bullet between Victor's eyes, I made a call. She picked up on the second ring. Mr. Hale? Lydia, I said, leaning back in my chair. How would you like a story? The kind that makes front-page noise. Lydia was a specialist, a corporate gossip-monger dressed in legitimacy. When she wrote, markets trembled, and I gave her just enough. Not everything, just a taste to rattle Victor's empire and make the world start asking questions. By morning, the headline screamed, investment king or paper giant? Unexplained holes in Victor Gravani's portfolio. It was chaos, and the reactions were instant. The stock dipped, reporters swarmed. Victor held a press conference, standing in front of cameras with his polished smile, denying everything, calling it misrepresentation, a smear campaign by competitors. But I saw it, the flicker in his eyes. He was rattled. And for the next 3 days I reveled as his empire shakes with yet another release of more incriminating evidence against him. But amidst that joy was a jolt of concern, worry, if you may. I haven't heard from Thomas since the night he stormed into my house and left me with his truth. That morning I was reviewing the latest tremors Lydia had caused when my office door opened without a knock. Victor walked in. Sharp suit, gold cufflinks, arrogance dripping from every step. 2 bodyguards stayed in the hall, but he entered alone. That alone told me he wanted this personal. Mr. Hale, he said smoothly, shutting the door behind him. We need to talk. I didn't rise. I folded my hands on the desk and looked at him like a wolf does when another wolf strays too close to its den. By all means, sit. Or should I call security first? His smile didn't waver. He sat. You think you're clever, don't you? Stirring the press, trying to undermine my reputation. I tilted my head, studying him. If a reputation can be shaken by whispers, perhaps it wasn't built on much. His eyes narrowed. Careful, Damien. You're playing in waters far deeper than you realize. I leaned forward, voice calm, deliberate. No, Victor. I know exactly how deep it goes. Offshore accounts, fictitious subsidiaries, investors you shouldn't be touching, and somehow your husband knows all of it. The smile cracked, just a fraction. There it was, the slip I wanted. You've been sniffing around where you don't belong, he said coldly, and I'll give you one chance to stop. Walk away. Leave Thomas out of this. He is mine. He belongs to me. My laughter filled the office, low and dangerous. Thomas doesn't belong to anyone, least of all a coward who needs chains and bruises to keep a man in his bed. Victor's jaw tightened, his mask slipped, anger flashed in his eyes. He hasn't been home in 3 days. Where is he? So that was it. That's what gnawed at him. He thought Thomas was with me. I stepped closer, close enough he could feel the weight of my presence. If you can't keep track of your own husband, Victor, perhaps you should ask yourself why. Maybe he finally realized a gilded cage is still a cage. His lips curled. You think you've won something here? I could destroy you with a single deal. I could snatch every contract from under you until your empire crumbles. In fact, he leaned forward, voice like a dagger. The deal you're chasing in Dubai, I already intercepted it. It's mine now, and you'll never get near it again unless you agree to my terms. Stay away from Thomas. For a moment, silence stretched between us, the kind that crackled, dangerous. Then I laughed, a sound of pure defiance. Keep the deal. His eyes narrowed. What? You heard me. Keep it. I built my empire from the ground up, Victor. I can lose 10 deals and still rise higher than you ever will. Because unlike you, I don't need to chain men or engage in shady deals to win. His hands gripped the chair arms, white-knuckled. I leaned closer, lowering my voice until it was almost intimate. You want to know what really keeps me awake at night? Not the deals, not the money. It's wondering how long before Thomas finally snaps and tears you apart himself. Because make no mistake, my eyes locked onto his, unflinching. When he does, I will be there to help him sharpen his claws. For the first time, Victor didn't have a comeback. He just sat there fuming with potent anger. I straightened, smoothing my jacket. You should go, Victor, before I forget my manners. He rose, stiff, mask barely holding. This isn't over, Damien. I smiled, cold, sharp. No, it isn't, but it will be. And when it ends, you'll wish it had been over sooner. He left, the door slamming behind him, and I sat back at my desk, fury still simmering, one thought circling like blood in water. Where the hell are you, Thomas? My phone rang 10 minutes just after midnight. Marcus's voice was low, urgent. We've got a problem. It's Thomas. He's been taken. My blood froze. Where? He rattled off coordinates. And the one responsible? I asked, though I already knew. Ivanov, he said. Of course it was. Victor had finally shown his teeth, kidnapping his own husbands, at all shades of messed up. I grabbed my keys and was out the door before the call even ended. The drive blurred into a single boiling thought. He touched him again. When I arrived, the warehouse was silent, too silent. My men were stationed outside, but they followed my orders. No interference, no police, no premature strike. Thomas needed me calm. He needed me smart. I pushed the door open. But what I saw wasn't what I was expecting. At all, inside was all sort of chaos. Broken chairs, blood on the floor, unconscious men sprawled where they'd fallen. And in the center of it all stood Thomas. He is holding a gun in his hand, a bruise darkening his cheek, blood dried at the corner of his lip. And standing across from him, Victor Ivanov, smug even with a weapon pressed to his head. The sight made something primal in me want to rip Victor apart with my bare hands. But I held still, because the fire in Thomas's eyes told me, this time, he didn't need saving, he needed finishing. Sign it, Thomas growled. His voice was sharp, lethal, in a way I hadn't heard in years. He shoved the papers toward Victor, and on a closer look at it, it was divorce papers. Victor laughed, ugly and cruel. Do you really think this ends with a signature? Walk out that door and I'll have your father in handcuffs before sundown. I'll destroy every piece of your pathetic little family, and if you kill me here, you'll never walk out alive. Thomas's hand shook, just slightly, but I knew that shake. It wasn't fear, it was rage restrained, begging to be unleashed. That was my cue. Funny thing about cages, I said, stepping into the light. My voice echoed through the warehouse. You lock a wild thing in long enough, it doesn't break. It learns. And when it gets free, I smiled coldly, it remembers who put the chains on. Both men turned. Victor's smirk faltered. Thomas's shoulders dropped with relief, though his gun stayed steady. I walked forward, slow, deliberate, holding a thick folder in my hand. Victor, you've spent years thinking you're untouchable, but your empire is nothing more than a house of cards, and I hold every card you tried to hide. I tossed the folder onto a table. Papers spilled out. Every false ledger, every offshore account, every smoking gun Thomas had risked himself to gather. Victor's face strained of color. That's impossible. I was discreet. Not discreet enough, I cut him off. You underestimated the man you married. And me. I stopped beside Thomas, resting a hand on his shoulder. He was trembling with fury, but he leaned into the touch like he always had. There are only two paths out of here, I said, voice low and sharp. Option A. I make one phone call and every shred of evidence goes to the press, the authorities, the world. You'll spend your last years rotting in prison while your empire burns. Victor's throat worked. Or, I continued, Option B. You sign the papers. You sign everything you took from Thomas's father back into his name. You walk out of here with your empire intact, for now. And you never come near him or his family again. Silence. Victor's eyes darted between us, calculating. Then he laughed bitterly. You wouldn't dare? Thomas finally spoke, his voice low but cutting. Try me, Victor. You don't have a choice here. He tossed the pen onto the table. Victor picked it up, shaking now, and signed. One paper, then another, then another. Each stroke of ink was another chain snapping open. When it was done, Thomas yanked the papers back, breathing hard. Now make the call, he demanded. Transfer everything back to my father, on speaker. Victor hesitated, then did as ordered. The confirmation came through. Thomas's jaw unclenched for the first time that night. You promised, Thomas said. His voice cracked, anger and something else. You promised you'd never touch me or my family again. Victor sneered. I promise. I stepped forward then, closing the gap, and before he could flinch, I slammed my fist into his jaw. He crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain. I crouched, my voice a growl. That's for bruising my tiger. Then I stood, pulling Thomas into my arms. He sagged against me, shaking, but alive. We walked out together, into the night, into freedom. When we reached the car, Thomas sank into the seat, tears spilling silently down his cheeks. Thank you, he whispered. I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I smiled softly. It's not over yet. I pulled out my phone, dialed, and when the line connected, I said, release everything. Plan A proceeds. Thomas's head jerked toward me, eyes wide. You said. I said I wouldn't stop him from burning, I corrected, smirking faintly. I never said I wouldn't light the match. The line clicked off. Somewhere out there, Victor's empire began to crumble. I turned back to Thomas, brushing a hand down his cheek. You're free now. Free to choose. Free to walk away. I won't hold you. He stared at me, eyes shining, lips trembling with words he wasn't ready to say. Then he leaned back, silent, letting the night carry us forward. Yes, I gave him a choice. Let him come back to me when he's ready. My tiger always finds his way home. It had been 3 weeks since that night. 3 weeks since the warehouse, since Victor's empire began to crumble, since I'd looked Thomas in the eyes and told him he was free. I hadn't seen him since. I told myself that was the point. That freedom meant letting him go, letting him breathe without me pulling at his shadows. But some nights, I still caught myself staring at the empty glass he once held at my bar, or at the gloves he left behind after he nearly tore my punching bag off its chain. I missed him. God, I missed him. I had just finished another meeting when I stepped into my office late one evening. The city stretched out in golden lights behind me, a kingdom I had no desire to rule without him. And there he was, sitting in my chair, legs crossed, wearing black again. He looked up as if he owned the room. The bruise had already faded, the fire back to his eyes, the familiar smirk lurking under his lips. My heart stopped. Thought you'd never come back, I said quietly, shutting the door behind me. Thomas smirked, that dangerous little tilt of his lips that always undid me. You told me to find a loose end in the mess, didn't you? I did. Turns out, it was you. I crossed the room in 2 strides, but I didn't touch him. Not yet. He had to choose. He stood, closing the space himself. This time his hands curled into my jacket, his lips brushing mine before he whispered, I'm not running anymore, Damien. And then he kissed me, his mouth claiming mine and fusing us together in every way possible. When we finally broke apart, I breathed against his lips. Welcome home, little tiger. And for the first time in years, he didn't flinch at the name. Thanks for listening to the story, My Lil Tiger. If you enjoy this story, share your enthusiasm in the comment section and don't forget to hit the subscribe and notification buttons so you don't miss any story uploads. See you in the next one.